The maid heard crying every night, but no one believed her, until she discovered a hidden room behind the library bookshelf. There, the boss's son was trapped, sick and forgotten, and the stepmother would do anything to hide the truth. Margaret Wilson had worked at the Thornfield estate in Connecticut for 15 years. At 52, she knew every inch of the historic mansion built in 1908 by railroad tycoon James Thornfield. The sprawling Victorian house with its turrets and wraparound porches had been home to generations of Thornfields, and Margaret had served them all with quiet dignity and unwavering loyalty, which is why the flickering lights in the library caught her attention immediately. At first, she dismissed it as faulty wiring. The estate, despite regular maintenance, had its quirks. But after 3 consecutive nights of the same pattern, 3 quick flashes, then 3 slow ones, then 3 quick again, Margaret's instincts told her this was something else entirely. "Mrs. Thornfield," she said one morning as she served coffee to Rebecca Thornfield, who had married the widowed owner William 2 years prior, "I noticed the lights in the library have been acting strange. Should I call an electrician?" Rebecca's perfectly manicured hand stilled over her iPad. "No need, Margaret. William already has someone scheduled next week." Her voice was honeyed, but her eyes remained cold. "Besides, the library is off limits for the time being. I'm reorganizing the collection." Margaret nodded, but something about Rebecca's tone left her uneasy. The library had never been off limits before, not in all her years of service. That night, after completing her duties, Margaret couldn't sleep. The flickering lights haunted her thoughts. Using her master key, she quietly made her way to the library, her heart racing as she eased the heavy oak door. Open. The room stood silent, moonlight streaming through tall windows. Nothing seemed disturbed. The floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the antique reading tables, the leather armchairs, all exactly as they should be. She waited, and sure enough, after 5 minutes, the lights began their sequence. 3 quick, 3 slow, 3 quick. Following the source, Margaret moved toward the east wall, where a particular bookcase stood slightly askew from the others. Running her fingers along the carved wooden frame, she discovered a small lever disguised as an ornamental detail. With trembling hands, she pulled it. The bookcase released with a soft click, revealing a hidden passageway, a panic room likely built during Prohibition. And there, huddled on a small cot, was 10-year-old Ethan Thornfield, William's son, whom Margaret had been told was away at boarding school. "Ethan!" she gasped, rushing to the boy. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken. He looked severely malnourished, his clothes hanging loose on his thin frame. She could see his cerebral palsy had been exacerbated by confinement. His legs were cramped in painful positions. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. "She said Dad sent me away, but she locked me here instead. She says I'm a burden." Margaret felt her blood run cold. "How long have you been here, Ethan?" "Since the day after Dad left for his San Francisco trip. 3 weeks, I think." He reached for her hand. "I found the light switch. I remembered the SOS signal from my scout book." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as she examined the modern electronic lock that had been installed on the inside of the door, preventing Ethan's escape. "I'm going to get you out of here," she promised, her mind already racing. "But we have to be careful. Does she check on you?" "Only at night when you're off duty. She brings water and some food." He gestured to a small table with meager provisions. "She said if I make noise, she'll send me somewhere worse, somewhere no one will ever find me." Margaret squeezed his hand, rage building inside her. "Listen to me, Ethan. I'm going to find a way to contact your father. But until then, I need you to keep up your strength. I'll bring you more food tomorrow night." As she carefully closed the hidden door, making sure it appeared undisturbed, Margaret heard footsteps in the hallway. She quickly dimmed the library lights and slipped behind a curtain just as Rebecca entered, her silk robe flowing behind her. The woman moved directly to the bookcase, checking the latch with practiced precision. Satisfied it remained secure, she scanned the room suspiciously before leaving. Margaret waited 10 more minutes before daring to move. As she crept back to her quarters, she realized the danger she now faced. Rebecca Thornfield wasn't just a cold stepmother, she was deliberately harming a child. And Margaret was the only one who knew. Tomorrow she would need to find a way to contact William without alerting Rebecca. But how? The house phones were monitored, staff cell phones were collected during work hours, and the groundskeeper, Mr. Davidson, seemed to report everything to Rebecca these days. As Margaret finally reached her small room in the staff quarters, a new determination filled her. In 15 years, she had watched Ethan grow from an infant into a bright, kind boy after his mother's passing. She had promised Charlotte Thornfield on her deathbed that she would always look after her son. Now that promise would be put to the ultimate test. The following morning, Margaret moved through her duties with calculated normalcy, all while her mind raced with plans. She needed to find a way to feed Ethan without raising suspicion and somehow reach William, who wouldn't return for another week according to the staff schedule. "Margaret, are you feeling all right?" Rebecca's voice cut through her thoughts as she dusted the living room. "You seem distracted today." Margaret forced a smile. "Just a poor night's sleep, Mrs. Thornfield. Nothing to worry about." Rebecca approached, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "You know, I've always valued your dedication to this household." She adjusted a vase of fresh-cut roses. "William speaks so highly of you. It would be a shame if health issues had forced an early retirement." The threat hung in the air between them. Margaret's hands stilled on the feather duster. "I'm perfectly fine, Mrs. Thornfield. Just aging bones," she replied carefully. "Good." Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. "By the way, I've asked Brian to trim the hedges outside the library windows. Too much shade is bad for the books." Margaret recognized Brian Miller as the new groundskeeper's assistant Rebecca had hired last month. A burly man with cold eyes who seemed to shadow Rebecca's movements. The mention of the library windows sent a chill down her spine. Rebecca was eliminating any external signals Ethan might attempt. That evening, Margaret prepared a serving tray with a sandwich hidden beneath napkins and a water bottle disguised among cleaning supplies. As she approached the library, Brian stepped out from a connecting hallway. "Need help with that, Margaret?" he asked, eyeing the tray. "Just some late cleaning, Brian. Mrs. Thornfield mentioned wine stains on the library carpet." He blocked her path. "Mrs. Thornfield said the library's off limits. She asked me to handle any maintenance there." Margaret's heart hammered in her chest. "Well, she specifically asked me to take care of it tonight. Perhaps there was a miscommunication." After a tense moment, Brian stepped aside. "I'll check with her. Don't take too long." Once inside the library, Margaret quickly moved to the hidden door. Ethan was even weaker than yesterday, barely able to sit up. "I brought food," she whispered, helping him eat small bites of the sandwich. "Ethan, I need to call your father. Do you know his direct number?" Ethan recited it between careful sips of water. "Margaret, my legs hurt really bad. I can't feel my feet anymore." The medical severity of the situation was escalating. Deep vein thrombosis could develop from prolonged immobility, especially with his condition. Margaret knew time was running out. "Hold on just a little longer," she pleaded. Back in her room that night, Margaret found her personal belongings had been disturbed. Her medication for occasional anxiety, prescribed years ago and rarely used, was now prominently displayed on her nightstand instead of tucked away in her drawer. A chill ran down her spine as she realized Rebecca was setting the groundwork to discredit her, possibly claiming emotional instability. The next day, Margaret found an opportunity when Rebecca left for a charity luncheon. Using the kitchen phone, she dialed William's number with trembling fingers. "Margaret, is everything all right?" William's voice answered, concern evident. "Mr. Thornfield, it's about Ethan." "Ethan, he's at Westmont Academy. What about him?" Margaret took a deep breath. "Sir, he's not at any academy. He's locked in the panic room behind the library. Rebecca has kept him there for weeks. He's severely malnourished and—" "Margaret," William interrupted, his tone shifting dramatically. "Rebecca mentioned you might be having episodes. She said you've been imagining things, becoming obsessed with Ethan's absence." Margaret's blood ran cold. "What? No, William, please listen. She said you've been sneaking into the library despite her telling you it's being renovated. Look, I know Charlotte's passing hit you hard, and you were always close to Ethan, but this isn't healthy. William, I'm looking at Ethan's condition with my own eyes. Your wife is—" "That's enough!" His voice hardened. Rebecca warned me you might call with wild accusations. She's worried about you, Margaret. We all are." Tears of frustration formed in Margaret's eyes. "Please, just come home and see for yourself. That's all I ask." After a long pause, William sighed. "I'll try to catch an earlier flight, but Margaret, please stay away from the library until I return, and perhaps consider taking some time off." The line went dead. Margaret stood frozen, the receiver still in her hand. Rebecca had masterfully turned William against her, painting her as unstable and delusional. Worse, she now knew Margaret had discovered her secret. As if on cue, Margaret heard the front door open. Rebecca had returned early. "Margaret, who were you speaking with?" Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her designer sunglasses perched on her head, face carefully composed, but eyes alert with suspicion. "Just confirming a grocery delivery, Mrs. Thornfield." The lie came automatically, as Margaret busied herself with wiping already clean countertops. Rebecca studied her for a moment too long. "I see. Well, I've returned early because I've arranged for Dr. Reynolds to stop by. He's concerned about your recent episodes." "Episodes?" Margaret's voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The confused wandering, Margaret. The paranoia. Brian mentioned you seemed disoriented last night, insisting on cleaning the library against instructions." Rebecca's voice dripped with rehearsed concern. "We're worried about you." The trap was closing. Margaret realized that whatever she said now would only reinforce the narrative Rebecca had crafted. She needed time and evidence. "I'm feeling perfectly fine, but I appreciate the concern," Margaret replied, forcing a grateful smile. "If you'll excuse me, I need to prepare dinner." That evening, as she served dinner to Rebecca and Brian in the formal dining room, Margaret noticed something had changed. The casual intimacy between them suggested their relationship extended beyond employer and employee. Brian's hand brushed Rebecca's shoulder with familiar ease, and their exchanged glances spoke volumes. "Margaret," Rebecca called as she turned to leave. "Dr. Reynolds will see you tomorrow morning. I've taken the liberty of scheduling the appointment. Brian will drive you." "That's really not necessary." "I insist." Rebecca's smile was a blade. "Oh, and I've asked Janet to cover your evening duties tonight. You should rest." Margaret understood the message clearly. She was being kept away from the library, away from Ethan. Later that night, unable to sleep and growing desperate, Margaret crept toward the library once more. The mansion was quiet except for the distant sound of classical music from Rebecca's suite. Just as she reached for the library door, she noticed it was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling onto the carpet. Peering through the crack, she saw Brian inside, methodically searching through books on the shelves nearest to the hidden door. He pulled out volumes, flipped through pages, and replaced them, his movements suggesting he was looking for something specific. Margaret drew back, puzzled. Was he searching for the mechanism to open the hidden room, or was there something else hidden in the library? When Brian finally left, Margaret slipped inside, moving directly to the section he had been examining. The collection belonged to Charlotte Thornfield, William's first wife and Ethan's mother. Volumes of poetry, classic literature, and family photo albums filled the shelves. As Margaret ran her fingers along the spines, she noticed a thin envelope protruding slightly from between two books. Pulling it free, she found a letter addressed to her in Charlotte's elegant handwriting, dated just weeks before her passing. With trembling hands, Margaret unfolded the paper and read, "Dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, my concerns have manifested in ways I hoped they never would. I've seen how Rebecca looks at Ethan when she thinks no one is watching. The coldness, the calculation. William is blind to it, enamored as he is. I fear what might happen to my son should anything happen to me. Rebecca has made comments about how burdensome children with special needs can be, how they hold back their families from social advancement. I've prepared documents with my lawyer that ensure Ethan's care and inheritance, but documents can be challenged, manipulated. What Ethan needs most is someone who truly loves him watching over him. You have been more than staff to us, Margaret. You've been family. If my intuition proves correct and Ethan ever needs protection, especially from those who Should love him most, please be his guardian angel. With eternal gratitude, Charlotte. Margaret pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Charlotte had known, had sensed the danger Rebecca posed even before her passing. This letter was evidence. Not enough for authorities, perhaps, but certainly enough to make William question Rebecca's narrative. As she carefully folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket, Margaret's gaze fell on a small, worn book of poetry nearby. Curious, she pulled it out and found several more letters hidden within its pages, all from Charlotte, documenting her growing concern about Rebecca's fixation on the family fortune and her thinly veiled contempt for Ethan. One passage stood out sharply. She suggested today that institutions exist for children like Ethan and how they free families to live normally again. When I confronted her, she laughed it off as a joke, but her eyes remained cold. William didn't hear, absorbed in his work as always. Armed with these letters, Margaret felt renewed determination. She would get Ethan out, with or without William's immediate help. The boy couldn't wait any longer. As she replaced the poetry book, Margaret heard a noise from behind the hidden door, Ethan's weak knocking. He had heard her in the room. "Margaret," his feeble voice called through the wall. "Please help me. I don't feel good." "I'm here, Ethan," she whispered, quickly activating the hidden mechanism. When the bookcase swung open, the sight that greeted her made her gasp. Ethan lay curled on his side, his lips dry and cracked, his skin alarmingly pale. The boy's condition had deteriorated drastically overnight. "Can't feel my legs," he mumbled, his breathing shallow. "So thirsty." Margaret knelt beside him, gently lifting his head to give him sips from the water bottle she'd brought. His skin burned with fever, a dangerous sign that infection had set in, likely from pressure sores or urinary complications from prolonged immobility. His cerebral palsy made him particularly vulnerable to these complications. "Ethan, I need to get you out of here now," she said firmly. "Your father is coming home soon, but you need medical attention immediately." The electronic lock on the inside door presented the most immediate obstacle. It required a passcode that Rebecca changed regularly. Margaret examined it closely, noticing smudges on 4 of the number keys. "Ethan, has she ever entered the code when you could see?" He shook his head weakly. "She makes me turn around." Margaret tried several combinations using the smudged numbers, but after 3 failed attempts, the keypad locked completely, a small red light blinking ominously. She couldn't risk triggering an alarm that might alert Rebecca or Brian. Glancing at her watch, Margaret realized it was nearly midnight. Rebecca would likely check on Ethan soon. She needed to act quickly, but strategically. "I'll be right back," she promised, closing the hidden entrance carefully. In the kitchen, Margaret prepared a thermos of chamomile tea, adding a generous dose of the sleep medication she found among her belongings. If Rebecca had planted it to discredit her, it would now serve a different purpose entirely. She found Brian in the staff lounge, scrolling through his phone. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Thornfield asked me to bring her evening tea, but I've just received a call that my sister is ill. Would you mind taking this up to her?" Brian eyed her suspiciously. "Your sister?" "First I've heard of any sister." "We're not close," Margaret replied smoothly. "But it's an emergency. Please, it would be a great help." After a moment's hesitation, Brian shrugged and took the thermos. "Fine. Go handle your family drama." Margaret watched from around the corner as he knocked on Rebecca's door and entered with the tea. 20 minutes later, satisfied that her plan had worked, she quietly approached Rebecca's suite and listened at the door. Silence. She tried the handle. Locked. Retrieving her master key, she carefully unlocked the door and peered inside. Rebecca lay sprawled across her bed, the empty teacup on her nightstand. Brian was slumped in an armchair nearby, his own cup empty as well. Moving swiftly, Margaret searched Rebecca's desk and found what she was looking for, a small notebook containing various codes and passwords, among them labeled simply PR for Panic Room 8531. With the code memorized, Margaret hurried back to the library. As she approached the hidden door, she heard voices. William had returned home earlier than expected and was standing in the library, examining the bookshelf with a perplexed expression. "Dad!" Ethan's weak voice called from behind the wall. "Dad! Is that you?" William froze, his face draining of color. "Ethan?" Margaret stepped forward. "Mr. Thornfield, I've been trying to tell you. He's behind that bookcase, in the old panic room." William's expression shifted from confusion to horror as he located the hidden lever Margaret pointed out. The bookcase swung open to reveal his son, emaciated and ill, curled on the small cot. "My God," he whispered, rushing to Ethan's side. "Son, what happened? Who did this to you?" "Rebecca," Ethan whispered. "She said I was holding you back, that you'd be better off without me slowing you down." William's face hardened as the truth crashed over him. "Margaret, call an ambulance, now!" Margaret was already dialing when they heard it, the electronic lock from inside, the panic room activating. The door began to swing shut automatically. "No!" William lunged forward, trying to block it with his body, but the heavy metal door continued its relentless movement. Margaret grabbed Ethan and pulled him clear, just as the door sealed shut with William trapped inside the panic room. Through the small window in the door, they could see him pounding frantically, his mouth moving in silent shouts. "The code," Margaret said, rushing to the keypad. 8531. Nothing happened. The keypad remained unresponsive. "She must have changed it again," Ethan whispered fearfully. From the hallway came the sound of unsteady footsteps. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her movements sluggish from the sedative but her eyes burning with fury. Behind her stood Brian, swaying slightly but equally enraged. "You interfering witch!" Rebecca snarled at Margaret. "You've ruined everything." "It's over, Rebecca," Margaret replied, positioning herself protectively in front of Ethan. "William knows everything now." Rebecca laughed bitterly. "William is locked in a soundproof room with limited air. In a few hours he'll be begging to agree to whatever I want." She turned to Brian. "Get rid of her. Make it look like she took those pills we planted and wandered off. The boy stays here." Brian advanced unsteadily, the sedative still partially affecting his movements. Margaret's mind raced, calculating her options. Despite his compromised state, Brian was still physically imposing. Behind her, Ethan trembled, his frail body pushed to its limits. "The silent alarm," Ethan whispered urgently. "Dad installed it last year after the break-in." Margaret immediately understood. Near the main entrance was a hidden panel designed to alert security services without sound. If she could reach it. "You won't get away with this," she said loudly, buying time as she slowly edged toward the library door, keeping herself between Brian and Ethan. "The staff will notice, people will ask questions." Rebecca's laugh was brittle. "The devoted housekeeper had a mental breakdown. Tragic, really. We tried to help, but she became obsessed with Ethan, imagining wild conspiracies. The official story is that Ethan is thriving at Westmont Academy." Her voice hardened. "No one questions the grieving widow and devoted stepmother." In that moment, Margaret saw the full extent of Rebecca's delusion, her pathological need to control William's life and legacy, viewing Ethan as an obstacle to be eliminated. The woman truly believed she was entitled to the Thornfield, fortune and prestige, unencumbered by a child with special needs. "Now, Brian," Rebecca commanded. As Brian lunged forward, Margaret made her move. She grabbed a heavy brass bookend from a nearby shelf and swung it with all her strength, connecting with Brian's shoulder. He stumbled backward, crashing into a reading table. Margaret seized the moment, scooping Ethan into her arms despite her aging frame. Adrenaline surged through her as she rushed past a surprised Rebecca and into the hallway. "Stop her!" Rebecca shrieked, but Brian was still disoriented from the blow and the lingering effects of the sedative. Margaret raced toward the front entrance, Ethan clinging to her neck. With one hand, she pulled back the decorative wooden panel near the door and slammed the red button hidden beneath. Immediately, silent signals would be transmitting to both the security company and the local police station. "They're coming," she reassured Ethan, carrying him toward the kitchen where she could secure them temporarily. "Help is coming." Behind them, Rebecca's heels clicked rapidly against the hardwood floor. Margaret locked the kitchen door just as the woman began pounding from the other side. "You can't hide in there forever," Rebecca shouted. "What do you think will happen when the police arrive? It's my word against a mentally unstable employee." Margaret ignored her, focusing instead on Ethan's deteriorating condition. His breathing was becoming more labored, his skin clammy. "Stay with me, Ethan," she urged, wetting a clean towel to cool his forehead. "Your father will be freed soon. We just need to hold on." Minutes stretched like hours as Rebecca's threats continued from beyond the door. Then, finally, Margaret heard what she'd been waiting for. Sirens approaching the estate, growing louder until they pierced the night directly outside. "No," Rebecca's voice turned panicked. "Brian, get rid of them. Tell them it's a false alarm." But it was too late. The sound of the front door being opened, authoritative voices calling out, filled Margaret with overwhelming relief. "In here!" she shouted. "We're in the kitchen. The boy needs medical attention." The kitchen door burst open as two police officers entered, followed closely by paramedics. Behind them, Rebecca stood with a facade of confusion and concern hastily arranged on her features. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," Rebecca began smoothly. "My housekeeper is having some sort of breakdown." "Save it," one officer interrupted, having taken in the scene. Ethan's obvious malnourishment and the protective way Margaret held him. "We received two emergency calls, one from the silent alarm and another from William Thornfield, calling from a cell phone inside a panic room." Margaret's eyes widened. William had his phone, but how? "Backup battery," Ethan whispered through cracked lips. "Dad always keeps one hidden behind the ventilation panel. He showed me once." As the paramedics gently took Ethan from Margaret's arms and began immediate treatment, Rebecca's carefully constructed world crumbled around her. Brian, still affected by the sedative, confessed everything when questioned separately, hoping to reduce his own culpability. William was freed from the panic room within the hour, rushing immediately to the hospital where Ethan had been taken. The doctor's assessment was grave but hopeful: severe dehydration, malnutrition, pressure sores, and signs of thrombosis in his legs. With proper treatment, however, he would recover, though the psychological trauma would take longer to heal. Rebecca and Brian were arrested, charged with multiple felonies, including child endangerment, false imprisonment, and attempted harm to both Ethan and William. 3 months later, the Thornfield mansion had transformed. Sunlight streamed through windows once kept curtained. The library had been completely renovated. The panic room converted into an accessible elevator to help Ethan navigate the historic home more easily. Margaret, now officially appointed as the household manager with significantly increased responsibilities and compensation, had moved her younger sister and nephews into the East Wing, filling the once somber halls with laughter and life. William, having taken an extended leave from his international business, dedicated himself to Ethan's recovery and to rebuilding their family bond. The trauma had forced him to confront his workaholic tendencies and absence as a father, patterns he was now committed to changing. Ethan, though still undergoing physical therapy, for his legs, had returned to his studies with renewed enthusiasm. His resilience astonished everyone, including his doctors. The bookcase that had once concealed his prison had been removed entirely, replaced with an open archway filled with light. On a warm afternoon, as Margaret oversaw a small celebration for Ethan's 11th birthday in the garden, William approached her privately. "I can never thank you enough," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my son when I failed him." Margaret shook her head. "Charlotte knew. She left letters warning about Rebecca. I was just keeping my promise to her." William nodded solemnly. "Charlotte always saw people clearly. I was blind to what was happening in my own home." He watched as Ethan laughed with Margaret's nephews. "But I see now. Family isn't about blood or legal documents. It's about who stands by you, who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself." During the legal proceedings, Rebecca's motivations were laid bare. She had viewed Ethan as an anchor, preventing William's social and professional advancement. In her distorted thinking, she had convinced herself that the boy was a living reminder of Charlotte, a shadow that needed to be erased, for her to claim her rightful place. She had justified her actions through her own warped logic, claiming she was saving the family from a burden. Her testimony revealed deep psychological issues and a complete lack of empathy. The library, once the scene of such horror, was now transformed into a bright, open space filled with games and educational materials. Windows that had been heavily curtained now allowed sunlight to pour in. Where darkness and secrets had once ruled, openness and light prevailed. For William, the experience had been transformative. He had reduced his international travel by half, delegated more responsibilities to his management team, and committed to being present in his son's life. He regularly attended Ethan's therapy sessions and school events, building a relationship that had been neglected for too long. As part of Ethan's healing process, his therapist had suggested writing about his experiences. His essay titled My Hero had brought tears to everyone's eyes when he chose to write about Margaret, detailing how her courage and love had saved him when he had nearly lost hope. The Thornfield estate, once a cold showcase of wealth and prestige, had become a true home. Margaret's sister, a kindergarten teacher, now lived in the East Wing with her 2 sons, bringing youth and energy to the mansion. The staff, previously kept at a professional distance, were now treated as extended family members, with regular meals shared together. During family dinner one evening, William raised his glass in a toast. "To found family," he said, looking around the table at the faces that had become so dear to him. "To those who choose to love and protect, even when it's difficult." Ethan, seated beside Margaret, reached for her hand beneath the table. "Thank you," he whispered, his eyes full of the same quiet intelligence his mother had possessed, "for believing in me when no one else did." For Margaret, now in her mid-50s, this new chapter brought unexpected fulfillment. She had kept her promise to Charlotte in ways she could never have imagined. The Thornfield mansion, once just her workplace, had become her home in the deepest sense of the word. The panic room that had been Ethan's prison was demolished entirely, replaced with an accessible elevator adorned with murals of open skies and landscapes. A constant reminder that no walls would ever confine him again. A bronze plaque. Beside it read, "There are no locked doors in a true home." Rebecca, sentenced to 20 years in prison, would have plenty of time to reflect on her actions. Brian received a lesser sentence after cooperating with authorities, though his complicity ensured he would still serve significant time. As the first anniversary of Ethan's rescue approached, William announced the establishment of the Charlotte Thornfield Foundation, dedicated to supporting children with disabilities and advocating for better oversight of boarding schools and care facilities. The foundation would ensure that Charlotte's compassion and Ethan's resilience would benefit others facing similar challenges. The transformation of the Thornfield household proved that family is defined not by blood or marriage, but by those who stand beside you in your darkest hours. Where fear and cruelty had once reigned, love and trust now flourished. The shadows had been banished, and in their place stood a family forged by adversity and bound by something stronger than any legal document: the choice to protect, to nurture, and to love unconditionally. On a quiet evening, as Margaret tucked Ethan into bed, a ritual he still found comforting despite his growing independence, he asked her a question that had been on his mind. "Do you think Mum knew this would happen? That's why she asked you to watch over me." Margaret smoothed his hair gently. "Your mother knew that love is the strongest force in the world, and that true family isn't about who you're related to, but who will walk through fire for you," she smiled. And she was right. As she turned off the light, leaving his door ajar as he preferred now, Margaret felt Charlotte's presence, a whispered thank you, in the peaceful silence of a home that had finally found its heart.